on the ground since then. It's all gone, and it's getting a little springy now, so I'm feeling a little better.
Glad to hear it.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Well, cool. Without further ado, our recording has started. I want to thank Dave Harris from Magic Minds and John Chisholm from GE Digital are here to walk us through how to improve critical utility field processes with RPA. And with that, I'm going to mute myself and hang out. Take it
All
away.
right. Thank you, Ashley. So welcome back, everyone. For those of you who were here last week, sorry you're stuck with me again for the next hour. But the good news is I did bring someone with me who's going to do most of the talking today. So, and we've got something a little different than last week with the title there. Basically, we're going to be talking about how you can improve field operations using chatbots. So let me just get my slide. Is that all good, Ashley? You see that? Okay. So a little agenda rundown. We're going to do, I'll give you a little background on what is a bot. I think most of you know, but I'll talk a little bit about that. And John's going to dive into some industry trends and advances that are making bots more viable for utilities. And we'll actually walk you through some use case examples and talk a little bit how they're implemented, and we'll have time for questions. Also, just want to encourage you as we go, type your questions in the chat box. There'll also be, you can raise your hand at the end and actually speak if you'd like to, but if you're like me and just hide behind typing, just throw it in the chat window and we'll get to it for sure. So who are we? I'm Dave Harris. I'm the CEO of Magic Minds. I've been working in utility and telco space for 25 plus years, primarily on planning, consulting, and implementing GIS, GE Small World specifically, our partner here today, and ADMS and mobile mapping solutions. And with me, my new guest this week is John Chisholm. John's the VP of product management for GE's asset management line of products, which include GE Small World, Mobile Enterprise, and their grid analytics solutions. John has 30 plus years. He's older than me, so we're both old, I think is what we're saying here. 30 plus years in utility space and many roles as an IT guy at SRP, as a PM and operations leader for a consulting firm. He was my boss at one point, which is a difficult job. He probably has a few stories for you. And in the past 10 years, he's been on the product vendor side, 10 plus probably. How long have you been with GE now, John?
It's 12 now, I think.
12. That was close. So in customer support and project product management roles. So John's done it all, basically. And before I hand it over to John, I want to do a little stage setting here. Let me go to the next one. So John's company, GE, you might have heard of them before. 4 big divisions. John's here representing GE Digital, which is part of GE Power. An interesting fact, 40% of the world's electricity is managed by GE software. That's generation, transmission, distribution. So they have a little experience in the space. And then who is Magic Minds? We're not quite as big as GE. 100 people scattered around the globe. We are software engineers, utility and telco experts, and project managers. While you may not have heard of us, I'm sure you've heard of some of our customers like Exelon and GE and Duke and Entergy, just to name a few. And what we're working together with GE Magic Minds on what we're here to talk about today, chatbots specifically. I'm just going to dive right in here. What is a bot? So RPA, right? What is it? I think most of you, especially if you've attended this show in the past, the concept's been around forever. In the software world, you're basically automating simple, repetitive, routine tasks and doing them faster and more efficiently than a human. right? Most are not smart. They're typically like macros, just run a series of commands. But they're getting smarter. And, with AI and machine learning, all that's changing. So there's a lot of bots out there, right? And I just a couple types of bots. You have the behind the scenes bots that do all those repetitive tasks quickly and accurately. For those of you who attended last year, the in-person show, the gentleman from Entergy talked about how they use bots for finance and tax reporting. It was really interesting. He showed a org chart of bots. He actually had names on them. I'm not sure about that, but uh, he's attached to his bots. He's got a whole organization. I felt very Star Warsy, and all the functions they perform is very impressive stuff. And it's been, that type of automation has been very disruptive in the financial sector. And then another type of bot, which is what we're going to focus on today, are these customer-facing chat bots. And I'm sure you've interacted with one at some point in your life. You might be doing it now while you're not listening to me, talking to a chat bot on a website. Any website you go to now, usually a chat bot pops up and asks you, what are you looking for? How can I help you, right? They basically get as many questions answered until a human needs to be involved as possible. And like, most new technologies, the hype, I guess 5 or 6 years ago, initially didn't really live up to the hype, right? Everyone was talking about the virtual assistant bots, and I don't know if anyone even remembers Facebook M, but that was one of the early bots, the virtual assistant, and they actually they were trying to basically do a virtual assistant automated, and they figured out that that could do about 30% of the tasks before a human needed to get involved. So it was a little too labor intensive for Facebook. So they got out of that. They got rid of it a few years ago. But and I'm sure you guys have horror stories of circular conversations you've had with bots online. But it's changing, right? There's a lot of improvements with AI and machine learning, and they're evolving and greatly improving. So you're seeing a lot of good stuff, and even like telemedicine, finance, e-commerce, sales lead qualification type of stuff. There's a lot going on in other industries. So, gaining from those lessons learned, a lot of times, utility industry typically borrows from other industries. We get everything last, it seems like, as far as technology goes. But the good news is we let all those other industries cut their teeth on it, and we reap the benefits. So we feel like it's the right time to bring these to the utility sector. It's already happening. And as I mentioned, GE and Magic Minds are working on some field-related chat bots. So at this point, I want to hand it off to John to talk through those and show you a little bit of what we built so far. So I'm going to hand it off to you, John. It's all yours.
Great. Thanks, Dave. And I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of how this applies in our industry. And my examples are a little bit electricity based, but this is definitely important for the water, wastewater, telecommunications, and gas industries as well. But essentially, as we look at kind of the trends that are disrupting the power sector, the decarbonization, the huge influx of renewables is something that's changing the network and how we operate it. And as we do that, we're getting a lot more people involved in the operation of the network. We've definitely seen a lot of digitization, especially the connected devices and smart sensors. And this means that we can't make decisions in the same way we always did. So I'm going to show a couple of ways that we think bots can help with that today, and really easing the human decision making by taking some of the routine things away that can be decided by the machine. We definitely have a lot of decentralization that really is tied with the renewables, and the end users are becoming much more active. We use the term prosumer to talk about what might be at Dave's house right now, where he's a consumer part of the day and a provider part of the day if he has solar or wind connected in his house. And we have two different relationships that we're managing with people. And because that provides a multi-directional flow on the electric network, that means operating the network has become much more complex as we've experienced the decentralization. The electrification of transportation is a big deal. There's electrification that goes with that, with more of the world's heating moving over into heating and cooling, moving into electric rather than fossil fuels. And that's changing the load impacts, the criticality, but it also provides an interesting increase, in the total consumption, but in a way that we might think of using in a different way. So maybe if I've got my electric car plugged in today and it was a snowy day and there was an outage because a tree branch fell, I may be able to pull and use as a resource for my customers the electricity that I put into that battery in the car over the past 12 hours. All of that brings a lot more decision making, and it has to be done very quickly to provide stability on the grid. But as we kind of take a look at those, our research people have really been taking a look at how some of these come together. And we think the utility chatbots offer some very specific opportunities. We have an aging infrastructure, everybody knows about that, but we have more and more work that's driven from the field. We see that more than half of the work and the decisions about the work will be made in the field rather than in the office. So what might have been 3 days before to accept a request, send someone to the field, make a decision with engineers back in the office is now expected to be decided immediately upon a field visit. We're dealing with a different workforce. We've talked about that at several of these conferences. And we're also changing communication habits. So when I look at typical utility workers, there's an age group, probably mine, I would have to admit, who wants to talk to the dispatcher and understand what to do next and discuss the options. But there's a entire set of employees out there and our contractors who would prefer to see a text message with the same answer. They would prefer to not have to wait for a synchronous discussion with a person on the phone. They want to ask a question, drive over to the location. By the time they get there, they expect an answer has been provided and they can get to work. And those changes are fairly significant to the way we want to interact and how we want to share information. As we kind of see the way forward here, we think that people are going to be less and less on a full workstation, less and less on a using a phone or a radio, and they're going to want apps and communication methods that are through a really simple UI UX, and the chatbot can provide them that kind of lifeline back to all the resources within the company. So as we kind of look on the right-hand side of it, we do think we can cut operational costs by up to 30%, and I'll show you some of that in the scenarios coming up. We think that something like 85% of the customer interaction can happen without a human agent. And we're saying that that's not so far out in the future, that that's technically possible today. We do know from our industry analyst partners that over half of the, or about half of the businesses plan to spend more on chatbots than on mobile apps. So that's an interesting trend because we've come off kind of a decade of people putting mobile apps out into the field. A lot of our customers, the end user of our services, would prefer a customer service bot in terms of getting a quick answer in an emergency. They don't want to call and be on hold or through a voicemail set of options. They would prefer that they can use a bot and get that answer back on their device very quickly when there is an emergency. So, is the power out at my house? When will it be restored? When should I head home? Those kind of things. And there's an estimate of about a quarter of the world's population used a chatbot in 2019. That's all sorts of retail, and when I'm going to buy a car and it asks if I want to chat or asks me about a customer support issue I'm trying to work my way through. These are very prolific, and it really does seem to be the first interaction that companies will have with their customers in many instances. And so we see a huge impact for the industry in these areas. And what I want to do is show you 3 of our video demos. So in each case, this is some technology that we've worked on with Magic Minds. We're going to go through a storm assist example, one for outage management, and then I'm going to finish up with one that looks at crowdsourcing and how to gather data from the public at large, which may not fit everyone's situation, but I think you'll understand the concepts. And we're very anxious for feedback on these. If you have questions, put them in the window as I go. You will see some similarity because we built on the same demo technology for each of these. Our kind of work list, our ideas that we think we have here is probably up above 20 or 25 at this point. We see a ton of ways that this takes the utility business process and makes it easier for participants in the field. So what I'm going to do is take a look at the first one here. I just have to go start up a video. And I'm going to pause this. So let me pause right here at the start. Did we get is the video up where you can see it? Okay, great. 2 thumbs up from Ashley. That's normally what you want. So what I've got here really is focused on the middle of the screen, and I'm on the form factor of a typical cell phone. And so in this case, I've opened up an application that was provided, and the storm damage piece, the scenario here is we probably have an external crew. We've had obviously winter storm in this case come through the area, and we've called in crews from outside. And instead of the old days of printing them maps and having them leave the line office and go in their trucks out to the field, they could have actually installed the app on the drive over here. I've given them credentials for it, and they come in here basically saying to the chatbot, I'd like to pick up my first order. And I'll go ahead and run the video here. The system's going to respond back and tell me where the order is. And it also, in addition to that order piece, gave me an option to kick off the navigation that I have on this phone. So I went ahead and navigate over using tools I already have. The utility company didn't have to provide directions or any information about the service area. I might have actually used Waze or Google Maps, which might have told if there were road closures or delays along the way. But the crew makes their way over towards the location, and the system had asked that they would notify upon reaching. So what's going to happen is we're going to say, I've arrived and I'm ready for work now. And in this area, we know there was a storm in the area, and at this piece of the recovery, we're essentially scouting the area and looking for damage in here. So the system has said, tell me about pole down, damaged streetlights, damaged assets. I could have gone to look at an assigned order list. I'm not going to do that right now. But essentially, in this case, the utility has set up a workflow and given the contractor a very specific set of things. So I'm not taking at this point a lot of free-form text. I'm really wanting to understand what they see out there. And what they do is they're going to mark that it's pulled down and also that it's damaged and what type of damage that we see here. And it went past it. Let me back up just a bit because I want to talk about this piece. The system there asked for us to capture an image. And so now I'm going to use the phone that's native on the device here to pull in data that's going to be transmitted back to the company and tell me a little bit more, give a view of the damage that they see out in the field. So we'll go ahead and take that photo here. And once that's done, that photo is going to be geolocated. I know when it was taken, by who. I know if they were at the right pole and at the right assets here. And in this case, our chatbot is set up to gather some additional information. They say, yeah, I'd like to put in additional notes. I could speak this if I was on a phone app that supports that. In this case, we're going to type that in, and we can put as many notes in as we need to have here. And essentially the system loops back and looks for additional damage. Now at this location, our user said, yeah, there's no more damage for me to report. And so they went on to the next location. There are some remaining orders. So these are probably additional addresses that I want to go look for damage from this particular storm. And now I'll select the next of those and essentially start to repeat that process out there. Now, in this case, we can also do something that I think has a lot of hidden savings, which is modify the work list. So if this contract crew was nearing the end of shift and they realize they're not going to get 3 orders done, they're now asking for some of that to be unassigned here. And that data is going to be gathered up by the chatbot. In the back office, we talk to your corporate system that's doing your work scheduling, and we pull that one off the list. It now can be assigned to another crew. In the old days, I would have to wait till somebody comes back from the field. I would realize they didn't finish the work list. I would now have to assign it for a following shift and try to get that work moved to someone else. All of that work can be done by our corporate systems in the background because the chatbot has provided the information over to those systems. So let me go ahead and finish out here. And at that point, they're picking their next work order. They're going to move on to the next location. And our damage collection process for the damage assessment would come and repeat after that. So that kind of shows how I might use this with my contract staff. And one of the real advantages here is I didn't have to put any information out on their machines. Everything you saw here is encrypted and secure. So when they're finished with a week's work here, I can pull back their credentials and I don't worry about critical infrastructure data having been shared with others outside the enterprise. And I'll go ahead and move on to the next piece, which is an outage management example. Let me make sure I know how to run the presentation tool here. So once again, did we get the start of a video? Good. I'm looking for those thumbs up, Ashley. All right. So let me start out here. Very similar sort of a look and feel in this case. In this scenario that we're looking through, this is my own crews. They were working in a part of the business, out in the field somewhere, and they came across they were assigned an area where there's an outage, and they're also out in the field here making decisions on what to replace and what they can re-energize and backfeed. So what's happened here is my utility workers, who have some superior permissions for this, are asking about the PV capacity downstream. So they're standing at a certain network location, and what they want to do is look at inverting the flow and backfeeding into a neighborhood. But part of doing that is making sure they understand how much rooftop solar was in there, because from the information the crew has with them or available from the mobile switching app, they don't know if they've got the right capacity to restart that. They don't want to cause a follow-on outage or damage equipment here. So the chat asks them which of the orders they're working on. And then from that order, it understands, based on the order plus where they're standing, that they're near a switching point, and the machine has assumed that they want to run a query on the voltage from that starting point. So as we get back an answer from the field here, the chatbot is essentially going to do a network trace and the engineering calculations, maybe in the GIS or my ADMS system, and give a kW value that this is the information of what the load is downstream from here. That can be used in a calculation on another device, and in this example, maybe on my outage management mobile switching device app on the same machine, I would use that to help understand if it's safe to restart in this area. So we went and asked for that information. We didn't need additional information, but it did ask us here about recording other observations. And this is an important part of field work during a storm recovery. I might be out there and I want to for example, record some follow-on work. And in this case, the crew said, yeah, I want to put something more in. You're going to see us provide information about where the pole has fallen. And in this case, since it fell across a roadway, maybe I want to alert the repair crew that's coming, so they know what to bring with them. They bring the correct materials, the correct equipment. Um, but in this case, I'm giving data that will be used on a follow-up piece. The follow-up work order here will now go over into the work order system, and maybe that next pull down the way will get fixed within a week or two rather than as part of the storm work right now. Being able to record that in the field saves a whole lot of time, and this is intending to be able to replace what is today a largely manual process, where maybe I would come back to the yard at the end of the shift and say, oh, I have these 5 follow-up orders. But if you've worked at a utility, you find out that sometimes those 5 follow-up orders stay in the truck. Sometimes they go in the trash bin. They don't always make it into my work management system. So I've left work that's critical in the field without being recorded. And the chatbot here is really taking a look at the whole business process and looking across those pieces. So that kind of goes through my second use case, second scenario. And I think I may have lost my camera, which I'm not going to be able to fix while I step through this. So whatever image you have, I'm afraid I'm probably frozen. I hope it was a good one.
You look great.
My last piece here is on the crowdsourcing component of it here. And this one's a little bit further afield and was meant to really kind of express some new thinking. So in this case, one of the customers that we deal with, we were talking about how they do, how they get data back. And this was a small kind of rural electric. But in this case, they had a former employee, and apparently they have about a half dozen of these guys who used to work at the utility company. They have very good knowledge about the network out there, and it seemed like at every storm, these 5 or 6 guys would be calling in and saying, oh, here, there's a fuse out on this pole, or this switch number is where your failure point is. And they had a lot of knowledge in the field, but they had no actual official role at the utility. And the utility employees that we were talking to were saying, how can I get that in? Because when I trust these people, this is good, valuable information. A couple of other scenarios we've talked about is giving something to the local police that can collect data during a traffic, a traffic accident. They can take information in and kind of do the damage assessment before my crews get there, help us understand how critical the situation is. Or maybe my tree trim subcontractor, I trust them to give me data back during a major event that is normally not in their scope of work. So as we were talking to the utility company about this, we came up with a specific implementation. So this is a chat bot, but you might recognize that this is in the an application you may use today called WhatsApp. So in this case, we actually did it where I can text someone a number to put into WhatsApp, and they contact my chatbot back. I've not put an application. I've not given them a logon. I don't have any credentials to manage. I'm using something that's already on the phone that provides my data encryption and a few other services for me. So I'm going to go through a scenario that uses the chatbot in this case. So they opened up in WhatsApp. We knew the name of the person. It said, no, I've noticed where you're at, close to a service down. Can you check it out? So we've essentially asked the retiree to go and take a look at an area. We've given him a map. He can follow the links and navigate to that incident location using the GPS and mapping capabilities already on his phone. So they make it to that particular place and pop back into WhatsApp, and now they're interacting with our bot again. So once they've arrived at that location, we ask them, so in this case, we've sent back to them, this is some damage data that was already provided. So they want to know some information. They give a photo that maybe came in from law enforcement or came from a damage crew or something, and they want to, as we get to that location, they want us to take a look at what's broken there and give a little bit more technical information. So this chatbot is set up in a slightly different way than you've seen in some of the others. But he'll first essentially let us know that he's arrived, and that way if we geocode any additional information, we'll do it at this right location. And WhatsApp doesn't provide the voice input, and a little bit of slow typing in my video here. So when we asked them to capture the event, they went ahead and took a duplicate picture, which helps us verify that they're in the right location. We might have asked them things like, oh, give me a picture of the down wire or the guys that were supporting this, or maybe something about the street. If I understand, I might need to have traffic services there. In this case, since we're dealing more with an expert, we asked them to give us back some unstructured notes. So what the person in the field is going to do is tell us where the power's out. In this case, it's on all 3 phases, which would make sense with that pull down the way we see it. They're asking here in terms of a particular equipment type, because this is someone who knows how these repairs are done in the field. They might also ask for like the local police to provide traffic services, anything else I might want to put in that would help the dispatcher get the right resources into the field to solve the problem. So he's going to talk about where it's blocking the roadway here. And this is information that if I had to send a specific scout or a supervisor or somebody to the field, might be very expensive to gather. But I'm doing this very quickly out in the field with just the information that this person can provide back. And so this is one example of crowdsourcing. We have several others in terms of, like squeaky gas meters maybe being reported, or other kind of lower priority items. And you could choose to do this with a set of people like these retirees, or do this with an organization, or it could be open to the public if that's something that you want to be able to supply to your customer base. Now, in this case, I'm not sure this will be the end for everyone, but we've gotten back the information. We let them know that we're scheduling, and we thank them for it. In this case, they're providing a bill credit. So I talked about the value of the data. What they just told us might be worth $300 or $400 in terms of the cost of us putting a crew in the field to learn the same information. And they've decided in this case to do an incentive for the person that volunteered, and they know his account and can do a credit like that. So this is one kind of the third example, and I really wanted to focus on this one because there's nothing that the IT group within the company had to put onto these machines. There was no need to install new software or manage anything new out in the field. And that's a huge advantage in terms of getting data that's better for the process and drives better decisions for a very low cost. Now, the next thing I'll do, let me switch back to the presentation. And I'll finish up with just a couple of items. Did we make it back to the PowerPoint? Great. We use customer advisory boards, and as we kind of take R&D research projects towards product within GE, these are some customer feedback pieces. I just wanted to show this in terms of the bottom line here. Majority of our respondents felt that the chatbot flow would appeal to their workforce. And also what came out is they would like that as a primary mode of communication. So instead of having this as a backup option, they would like to actually start here. So with their own crews, with contractor crews, and with the public at large, they wanted the ability to use this as a primary mode of communication. We think that this is a great way to help out the crews in the field. This Canadian company talk about offloading that so that the routine tasks at the end of shift can be reduced. So when the work is done, the work is done. There's not paperwork to finish up because you did it along the way. One of the US companies really liked doing this over WhatsApp as an idea because there's no training and there's no rollout, there's no managing of that app on devices that belong to other people. We ran a few polls to understand what people would see out of this, and being able to reinforce the process workflow was very important. We felt that our customers felt that that would increase the speed and accuracy of field data collection. That was one that we did kind of like damage collection, but we were actually gathering new electrical connections before the trench was closed up in that particular example. Let's see. So I want to check if questions there because I'm about to turn it back. Oh, no, let me talk a little bit about some tech notes. So today's presentation is obviously not technical. We were focused on the business case, but I did want to pass along a few of the motivators, what we see behind it from a technology standpoint. Everything you looked at today is a cloud-based offering. That's what we were developing with Magic Minds. That means it's a very fast implementation, and it doesn't add to your IT workload. So you're not taking on a new major system upgrade or system implementation to be able to start implementing these kind of workflows. We see very easy integration. We have a set of features and tools that were built in to the technology that help with that. And that also, because we have that sort of an architecture and a well-isolated kind of web interface, it helps at upgrade time. So we don't have to pause your chatbot use if you're doing an SAP upgrade or you have something else like that going on within your company. That can essentially, we can accommodate that and smooth those over. This instant deployment out on third-party devices that I mentioned with WhatsApp is very attractive. We're looking at a couple of other options for that. And as we look at our security and encryption practices, we feel like that's something that we'd like to rely on what's common out in the industry rather than having to recreate that just for our utility customers. And the final point I want to make is really this is very good for a utility in the case of I've already got 24/7 out of the box, and I've got cloud scalability. So in the old days, a utility would often be limited because their phone system couldn't scale up during a hurricane or some other major event, and you would not be able to contact the people who could give you information about the power at your house. With the cloud solution, we can move that to other cloud locations as needed if there's a big event. We have the ability to scale up almost endlessly so that we can provide information and interact with all of your users out there. It's a real advantage for how we approach that. Now we can on follow-up get into a little more of the RPA technology that we're using and talk about how we've implemented the chatbots if you want to go down some of that. And let me look over before I turn it back to Dave here. Looks like we might have a couple of questions. I'm seeing what happens if the bot does not understand the response? Does it provide a phone number? That would all be configured on a per utility basis. So what I think we would probably be doing in my example for outage where I'm interacting with employees, I probably want a very quick path for them to get to the dispatch center and talk to the person who can give them better information or eliminate why they're stuck in the loop or whatever. If that was the crowdsourcing piece, I might just actually give up and say, I can't figure out what you're telling me, thanks for the effort, but we'll move on. If it's my contractors and other people out there, maybe I'm going to have them call someone that's more of a call center that does a little bit of screening before they talk to them. But the real piece that I think you're going to find over time, and Dave mentioned this a little bit up front, with all the bots that we have out there in the world, they're getting smarter and smarter. So if maybe I did my first one on a talk track that had 12 or 15 options, but over time, my chatbot tool is learning how people type stuff, how they may word the question differently. And maybe after 6 months use, I can answer the question, 1,500 different questions. And maybe after a year or two's use, I can answer it 15,000 different ways and in multiple languages. So it's really the learning, I think, is the key here to try to get to a point where we can pull back the time you have to ask for help. But I definitely think it's good design to kind of have a safe word when you're just causing frustration for the user, and give them an alternative to talk to a human being. I think that's good design, but it'll depend on each utility and also how they can staff for that and be ready to handle that. Love it if there's some other questions end up out there. And
Hey,
I think I'll
John, there was
pass.
that
Oh,
first one. Did it
do I need
lessen?
to scroll up?
No, it's the same. She asked three questions. You missed the first one. Did this lessen the number of dispatchers needed?
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, I didn't address that. As we've talked through with our customers, it may be that we'll reduce the number of dispatchers, especially during a larger storm event, but the focus was actually on getting better field response. So I could get maybe, in the case of damage assessment, I could get 30% more of my service territory covered in the first 24 hours was the type of metric they were chasing, rather than a dispatcher reduction, because maybe they had 3 or 5 of them. Coming down by one person didn't save that much money. So yes, the savings would be there, but it wasn't one that we dug in and explored. So I don't quite have an estimate on that. All right, let's check with Dave on whether I missed anything else. How are
Oh,
we doing?
you got the question that I said nobody would ask about cost.
um, we are still working on the cost to implement this. So I see it as an implementation that happens in like a few weeks, not a few months. And so that's going to bring the cost down. But we haven't set up our pricing for a subscription and then understanding the implementation. I would think the implementation is going to vary utility to utility, because maybe I'm hooking up with nice, fresh systems you have, or maybe you're running some stuff that's a mix of new and old. So there will be a little bit of cost difference there. But I would see this, if I talked about maybe putting in an OMS system, I would see this like 10% to 20% of the cost of one of those, if you want just a real high level estimate. But I think it's going to take us across, this year as we start to bring commercial offerings before we can really provide that pricing. And I hope that's helping out.
10% of what it took you to implement OMS. So
Yeah, I think that's probably a good kind of way to think about a rough
how
order of
many year?
magnitude. It says, is the assumption that all field workers have access to a smartphone? It seems now that our utility customers kind of expect everyone's going to show up with their own smartphone. And I realize that's not going to work in all the corners of the world, but it seems to be, for most nations, the general expectation. Now, that may not be one per person, it might be one per crew, that maybe the crew foreman has one. You could have a set of devices, like some iPads that you hand out during a storm, but I'm seeing companies wanting to move away from that. There were a few years back where people talked about, oh, I'll go from giving paper maps to each of the foreign crews. I'll instead give them an iPad that's got this loaded up, or some sort of tablet that's got it loaded up. But tracking that hardware and getting it back in, and then also controlling the data that was placed on it, were real hurdles in those days. In terms of implementation, you were asking if we would implement one group at a time or all at once. I think we could probably do it either way, but I think the best practice, because we are putting some process change into your company here, would probably be to establish this as part of a larger program and do one or two to start off before I move around the organization. I don't want to, I personally don't like the big bang implementations, over Labor Day, 3,500 employees are going to get a new capability. Those are hard to manage. So I would tend to look at what's my most critical group and where do I have a fairly receptive audience. And I would probably also favor starting with something that's aimed at employees and then at contractors and then at public at large, because if I have something for the local police department, but I'm across 12 jurisdictions, the discussion it's going to take to get that app on a device that a policeman has out there, that's going to be a pretty long discussion and a lot of variables. So I would tend to do inside and where I have the most control as my first step. So I would pick things that are like outage management that are around the dispatch center. I've got a pretty well documented process in place that I can introduce a change to, and I've got very few people who maybe are dissenting or don't have equipment or whatever the hurdles might be out there in the field. Okay. And yes, can be used by both contractors and employees. One of the ideas that's on that list of about 25 that I mentioned, and I'll use this one because it was my idea originally, is to gather streetlight data. So when streetlights are broken, they don't come on or they remain on during the day. That's almost like a nuisance call to the utility. But if on the same application that I do my billing, I could put something in and say, hey, the streetlight on my block, it stays on all day, and here's a picture of it staying on. Then the company could deal with that in their own schedule, and that might be something I want to give to the public at large. I think when you open up anything that chats with the public at large, you're going to get some weirdness, like grandma posts her grocery list or something, and you're wondering what you're going to do about it. So you're going to have to deal with that whole process. So they wouldn't be my first one to go, but the gathering data that maybe is other low impact piece, I think there's some hidden benefit streams that are in there, and that's what we'd like to explore with our customers, and that kind of gives you an idea of the thinking that we may have on our list here. All right, have we handled all of the questions, or have I missed any?
I think you got them.
I think you did.
All right, great. Well, and I appreciate the questions. That makes this a lot more interactive. If you have a favorite idea you want to share with the group, very welcome to those as well. But let me, at this point, kind of turn it back to Dave to finish us off here.
Sure. Thanks, John. That was great. In closing, we're this is great interaction at the end. We'd like to do a lot more of it. So, if you want to hear about the other 20 things that we have on our list and things that you have that you'd like to explore, we really want to, work with you on that and have some discussion. So, you've got both our email addresses here. You can, and we're both in that. Well, John will be after today in that LinkedIn group for this conference. I'm in there, so you'll probably get a message or two from us, a reminder from me or somebody about it. So I'd encourage you to connect with us, and we'd love to work with you on it and take it further, see what we can do for you guys. So. And if you need help building a business case, the topic we covered last week with Link and the digital twin, it fits right into building a business case for this type of transformation. So if you're looking to explore and figure out if it's something that makes sense for your company, we can help you with that too. So look forward to follow-ups.
Very cool. Well, thank you guys. I think what a terrific demonstration of what's possible out there, especially when you consider, you're dealing with a group of folks who aren't coming into the office every day and have email and, have a computer to log in. So to be able to set that up, I love that. I love that you have the sort of the WhatsApp for the, slightly more, public focus to be able to get them involved with the conversation as well. Did anybody else have a question that they wanted to ask either Dave or John here? We've got a couple of minutes.
Well, and actually, if we don't have a question, one of the things we had thought about doing for this conference, we may do it at other points, is actually a demonstration app that participants could log on to and do around the conference center or around their own neighborhood or something like that. Could you guys tell me in the chat window if that's something, would that benefit you, seeing more of a hands-on example? Would you like to be able to touch it and play with it, or are you good with the video demos we saw today? Okay, I'm seeing at least one yes, please.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We had struggled with whether we were ready to do that, and in the end, I made the call that we weren't quite mature enough. I really don't want to give you something that doesn't look good the first time. So we held off on that. But maybe as we look towards things at the fall conference or other places, maybe that's something we could do in a bigger way.
Excellent. Well, we definitely, I think that the videos that you showed were just perfect in terms of really demonstrating sort of different situations and different ways that that communication needs to happen, and being able to, sort of grab other aspects like, getting the directions from Waze or Google, and just like, yeah, that's brilliant, right? You're taking what's available and putting it out there. So.
And it makes it simpler for us. We're all about simplicity,
Cool.
to make these things reliable here.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, Dave.
Look at that. We actually had time for questions this time. So that's
I know,
good.
I'm impressed.
Dave was a taskmaster on the prepping. He was keeping me in line here.
Good. Super. All right. Well, in that case, I think this is just great information, and I think any utility that has field services can see how this can apply. So, really awesome. So, with that, I think what we'll do is just wrap it up here, and then take a little bit of a stretch break. I think we're on. We've got about we can add just a couple of minutes to our stretch break. So we're back up at 2:20 with the folks from Veride, Toronto Hydro, and Hydro One. So with that, I'm going to close out the room, and we'll see you in about 9 minutes.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much,
everyone.
And Dave, thanks so much.
Bye-bye.